Now, I'm a juvenile court judge, but I do sit by Superior Court designation. I do adult cases, criminal, civil, bench, and jury trials at least 1 week a month, okay? Been doing that since 2010. So I'm kind of like the utility judge down in Clayton County, all right? So I kind of wear both hats, go back and forth, and also keep in mind, too, that I was a parole officer for 10 years, way back in the 80s. I was the chief of the Atlanta Parole District, deputy director of program services for the Georgia State Board of Pardons and Paroles. So, you know, after practicing law for the years that I did, and I was a trial attorney and did a lot of work also for the Attorney General's Office, Section 1983 litigation, state tort claims defending state employees and state agencies and so forth, you know, among other things. So that's just a real quick background, but I come to the bench and I offer to you not just simply the perspective of the juvenile court, because I know many of you here are not just doing juvenile court jurisdiction. You're an adult from municipal to county, adult. And I want to say this right up front, that there are adult systems across this country that have adopted and replicated some of the things you're going to hear about this morning. How many of you in here know that your court is doing some type of, let's say on the adult side, for those who are doing adult, Superior Court, State Court, whatever, District Court, Circuit Court, that you're doing something similar to, and some call it deferred prosecution? Okay? Yes. Yeah. All right. That is exactly what we do for juvenile court and have for many, many years, and is codified in many state juvenile codes. It's called informal adjustments or pre-adjudication, okay, diversions, all right? And many adult courts across the country have adopted that based upon what we do with juveniles. And the other thing, too, I'm going to show you that the research over the years, which began on the adult side, and I'm very familiar with it, having been on parole doing case management and deputy director of field services, specifically with program. And I was charged for 6 months. I took leave, traveled the country on a national, in fact, it was on the National Association of State Courts, okay, grant, all right? Traveled the country to take a look at the best practices and come back to Georgia and propose to the parole board a new form of supervision, which today has been recognized, okay, not only nationally but internationally in terms of its supervision by including best practices, risks, needs, instruments, and various types of what we call evidence-based programs and practices. Well, you know, we found out now, over all these years, of the last decade plus, that really what works for adults works for kids, okay? And so I just wanted to kind of lay that out right up front, so those who have adult jurisdiction aren't thinking, oh, I'm just going to lay back and go to sleep, okay? I mean, you may do it anyway, all right? But that's why I'm down here from the podium, because I'm going to walk out here, and if I see you sleeping, I'm going to kick your chair, okay? All right, okay. So let's get started real quick. Let me make sure there we go. It says next. I'm going to take that literally, okay? All right, so this is an algorithm. It's in the most simple state, which also applies to adult supervision of probationers, okay? And it's very simple. You reduce detention of lower risk youth, all right, by developing safer alternatives for them, so that you can target your high-risk youth with intensive supervision. Come on, folks. The one thing you don't want is to have probation officers having to chase around low-risk kids on a caseload, because that dilutes and waters down the effective supervision of the kids who scare you. Because if you don't give them the supervision they need, like you need to be white on rice unless you like yellow on rice, or brown on rice, they're going to break into your cars, they're They're going to point a gun at you. They're going to pull a knife on you. They're going to rob you. So that's what's important and most effective is identifying, which is a whole nother area I'm going to talk about. Because how do you do that? How do you identify the kids who make you mad versus the kids who scare you? So that you can focus your resources on the kids that scare you. And then you deliver it through a collaborative system, okay? That will end up with a reduction in crime. And over time, not right away, okay, but over time, it's going to improve your economy, okay? Because employers do not want to come into a community where they're going to hire the people in the community who are robbing each other, where there's a high crime rate. They're going to be looking at the schools. They want to know what the graduation rates are like. All right? And that's a whole other issue I'm going to talk about as well, because I believe, and based on the recent studies of a model I developed back in 2003, that one of the key factors in reducing recidivism among juvenile offenders is how we treat them in the schools. And I'll talk more specifically about that. So just to give you an idea. Now, what's this dude doing here talking about to me? I mean, what is it about him that they picked your leadership here, okay, decided for me to be the closer, okay? Other than the fact I like to stand on chairs and jump up and down, keep you awake, okay? There's people out there saying, oh no, he's going to fall off. Oh no, get down, Teske, okay? Is this. What you see here, when we began our reforms, 2002 is our baseline year. 2003 is when, after about 2 years of bringing the community together and creating a collaborative, the sheriff, the chiefs of police, social services, mental health, the district attorney's office, the defenders, okay? You name it, the NAACP. Why? Because you know who's impacted the most when the system doesn't work are our kids of color. Okay? And so I wanted transparency. I wanted the folks who the people of color are going to and complaining to about what's happening on the streets. Why? You think they're going to come and talk to a white judge? Hello! Hey, is anyone home? Hello? Of course not. And let's not fool ourselves, okay? Matter of fact, I'm going to use Will Simmons for a moment. Something you may or may not know about Will. But when Will needed to pay his way to school through school, okay, all right? How many of you been down to Savannah, Georgia? Yeah, good. Yeah, I love that place. That's my watering hole. That's where I could get away from the Atlanta area where no one knows me, okay? There's minimal risk someone's going to run into me, so I can let my hair down and I can enjoy myself and I can drink my alcohol out in public and walk down the streets. God, that just feels good, okay? Especially for a judge, okay, where we have to act like we're really anally retentive, okay? All right? It feels good. But how many of you have seen the person at the Hyatt down below on River Street that plays the trumpet? You ever seen that person down there playing? Yeah, you. There you go. God bless you. Okay? Anyone else? All right? Been to see? Yeah, there you go. That's what Will Simmons used to do. That's what Will did. Okay? But you know what? When Will told me about that, and I don't know if I've ever confessed this to you, Will, but Will, I always go back to Will in my years since when I've gone through all this training on implicit bias. Okay? And I remember Will Simmons because I remember looking at that guy blowing the trumpet, hoping that people would put some money and change down there, and what I thought about that person. Homeless. Okay? You know what I'm saying? But you know what? We have to be careful because not everybody is who we might first think that they are. There's a reason why Will Simmons has the character that I know that he has. Because he did what he needed to do to be where he is today in a hard-working, legitimate, but yet knowing that other people are going to look at him in a certain way. Now that's what builds character, okay? And I'm going to tell you something else about this stuff I'm going to tell you that is incidental to this story of implicit bias and using Will Simmons, is that a lot of the things I'm going to share with you is counterintuitive to what a lot of people think about how to reduce recidivism. Many folks will, because I've gone through my early years, and will tell you, okay, of having darts thrown at me as being soft on crime. But how in the heck do you explain a 75% decline in juvenile arrest in Clayton County? 75% decline by doing what looks soft. Because you want to talk about having to endure those out there, and they always tend to be the loudest, the ones who want to say you're soft on crime. They make themselves sound like there's millions of them because they yell so loud and complain and do things like call up the press and the media, and they want to sensationalize some outlier case to make you look like you're stupid and dumb and you don't care. But you know what? If you really want to test how well we're doing with our kids in terms of their activity on the streets, look at their felonies. Okay? Because you know what? Misdemeanors don't tell me a darn thing. Because kids commit misdemeanors. That's what we do as kids. Come on, folks. I'm going to ask a question right now. I want a show of hands. I'm going to test you. Okay? How many of you in here, when you were a kid, when you were a teenager, committed a delinquent act, no matter how minor it was? Raise your hands. God bless you. God bless you. No, keep them up. Keep them up, everyone. Oh, 2 hands back here in the back. Oh, the truth shall make you free. God bless you. Thank you so much. And even some of you women raised your hands. A good number of you, your hand is still up. You want to be recognized. Look, both hands. You probably even want to share the things you did as a teenager. I don't blame you, because murder has no statute of limitations. No, I'm kidding. Okay. Look how many hands went up. Okay? That's why I don't care about misdemeanors. Because kids are neurologically wired to do stupid things. Okay? Now, some of you didn't raise your hands. I didn't take names. But there's 2 reasons. One of 2 reasons why. I mean, the first one's obvious. You're lying. Okay? Or if it wasn't lying, I don't mean to impugn your integrity. Okay? I don't mean to upset you to the point on the evaluation you put me down as the poorest there is because I hurt your feelings. Okay? All right? But the other reason, I'm just going to tell you, you were one of those kids I didn't hang out in high school because you were boring. Boring. There you go. But felonies, down 45%. Our burglaries are down, our residential burglaries are down 62%. Yet we, in the metro Atlanta area, in terms of a county, in Atlanta SMSA, we're the poorest. Just so you have an idea where Clayton County is for those who are outside the state of Georgia, those of you who flew into Atlanta, and you're going to be flying out today or tomorrow or whenever, you're in my county when you're at the Atlanta airport. Okay? That's my county, so you have a geographical fix. That's the northern end of my county. Core strategy one. Guarding the front door of the courthouse. Prevention, not detention. Okay? We want to separate the kids who make us mad from the kids who scare us. The ones who need to be detained are the ones that we're afraid they're not going to show up, come back to court. or they present a public risk to the community, a public safety risk to the community. Why? Here's what the research says. First of all, folks, incarceration makes kids worse, and that hurts public policy, okay? We don't need to be thinking that incarceration is the way that we need to change behavior. Incarceration should be reserved only for those kids who scare the hell out of us. I'll be frank with you, okay? And there's all the studies, and you have it. It's being downloaded. This is a paperless conference, okay? So you have it. So I'm not going to go over the studies because I don't have much time to go over the studies, but everything's documented. Everything I'm telling you is documented, okay? It's not arguable, unless you're just one of those who likes to argue with it, but that's a dysfunctional characteristic, so let's not go there. That requires therapy, okay? Traumatize people, traumatize people. To what extent should judges play a role in guarding against trauma for the protection of kids and for public safety, okay? Because that's what happens, is that many of the kids that are disruptive, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about it in a moment, okay, suffer from trauma, what's called adverse childhood experiences. Things that happen, persistent domestic violence, an untreated drug-addicted parent, an untreated mentally ill parent, a child being sexually abused at home by the mother's live-in boyfriend, the stepfather, in some cases even the biological father, okay, or physically abused consistently, all right? And I can go on with the list. In fact, adverse childhood experiences is a result of a co-conducted study by Kaiser Permanente and CDC in the late 1990s. How many of you have ever heard of the ACEs survey, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey? Very good, very good. We know from that, and it's even changing the lives of doctors and how they diagnose illnesses. Do you know if you score 7 or more on the ACEs survey, you are 3.5 times more likely to develop ischemic heart disease, the #1 killer in America? That's right. I mean, it is a problem because when you suffer from trauma, it impedes your brain's ability to address and handle and to learn. And many of our kids are entering kindergarten, especially from our poorer communities, and everything associated with it, 2 to 3 years behind their more affluent counterparts, and they never catch up. This thing you've heard, education is the great equalizer, bull. It's not. It's not until we focus and help our schools out to identify the kids who suffer adverse childhood experiences so that we change our systems and implement those things that will help them with those experiences and equip them with the tools so they can learn and study and not drop out of school. You want to increase graduation rates? All you have to do is figure out who's dropping out of school. It ain't that difficult. But for some reason, many systems across the country are not thinking that way. And if you want to reduce crime, increase graduation rates. How go graduation rates, so go crime rates? Come on, that's not difficult to figure out. I mean, who would ever think keeping kids in school would increase graduation rates? All right? Detention worsens the mental health of youth. Detention puts youth at greater risk of self-harm. Detention pushes kids out of school, causing collateral risk and harming public safety. Look, after 4 years, less than 15% of incarcerated ninth graders had completed their secondary education. That leads to collateral risk, poorer health, shorter life, less income, higher unemployment, okay? Which then leads to what? Compromising public safety. We push kids out of school, where do you think they're going to go? They're out on the streets, right? I heard it right here, right? And what are they going to do on the streets? They're going to find a way to survive. And how ironic would it be, sadly ironic, in their attempt to survive and make it, they break into your home, steal your car. Detention alternatives are cheaper, and it does reduce recidivism. And there's some studies right there. So in Clayton County, we started implementing all these alternatives to detention way back in 2003. Okay? You could see that we've had annual admissions to our local detention center decline by 66%. Okay? But the crime rate didn't go up. That's why I started off with those two slides about juvenile arrest down 75%, felonies down 45%. It's counterintuitive, isn't it? It is counterintuitive. Now, there's a science to this. I'm not just simply reduce arrests and your crime rates are going to go down. It's more to it than that. It's also the technicality of developing safe alternatives. It's about what you put in place to address those kids' needs. And we're going to get deeper into that before we come to an end, right before noon, to give you time to ask me some questions. So how? How to separate the kids who make us mad from those who scare us. Okay? And many of these tools are very similar to what we use on the child welfare side, because they use risk instruments on the child welfare side as well. I mean, to what extent do these parents, guardian, or custodians present such a risk that their child needs to be removed, that there's these exigent circumstances, okay, that can bring physical harm or serious emotional harm to this child, okay? So we can predict risk. We know better who to divert and detain. There is no excuse. This is one study among many that we're able to. Now, and I'm going to tell you the difference. There's a front-end risk instrument. There's a back-end risk instrument, and the two are different. Okay, the front end is what we call static. You'll hear it. Some states call it RAI, Risk Assessment Instrument. In Georgia, we call it Detention Assessment Instrument. And we implemented ours on our own way back in 2003. And it's static to the extent that it measures those things you can't change. Okay? You can't change your history, your rap sheet, right? You can't change what's already happened. All right? You can't change what you're charged with, your present offense. And we score all those things. Misdemeanors, felonies, different types of felonies, serious felonies, okay? Versus dynamic factors, static versus dynamic. Dynamic are those things we can change. And we could change education. I mean, you may be on a pathway to drop out, but you get positive intervention and you end up graduating. You can change education status. Okay? You can change your socioeconomic status. Okay? You could change your mental illness status to the extent that you can receive the treatment you need so your behaviors improve. Okay? All right. So it's important that at the back end we introduce dynamic factors, because at the back end is when you make a decision to put a kid, let's say, on probation. Now, how are we going to treat this kid? And you need those dynamic factors to determine what are the underlying needs and what type of treatment needs to address those specific needs. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. But here we're talking about the front end, static factors. It's a very quick and dirty sheet. Here in Georgia, you score from 0 to above 12. If it's 7 points or less, it's suggesting that you release, there's no need. It's like an OR, own recognizance, okay? If it's 8 to 11 points, it's medium risk, and it suggests release with some alternative to detention, okay? And I'll talk about those in a moment. If it's 12 or more, it's suggesting that you detain the child. Now, there can be aggravating and mitigating factors, and it's on our detention assessment sheet. And they're not exhaustive, as it's listed, but they get the intake officer to be thinking about, well, what else is there about this child? So we're not treating this child as a number and a score. So you could have a kid who scores high risk, but you can go ahead and bring it down. You can override it and justify it based on mitigating factors. Or you could have a kid who scores medium risk, and you could bump them up to high risk because of aggravating circumstances, okay? All right? So here's a good example. There's a decision tree. Detain or not to detain. And I just laid it out for you right there. And then the alternatives I mentioned. I mean, they vary from all over the country. If you were to go to www.aecf.org, okay? And then go to their JDAI. Once you get in there, go to their Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative. Click on that, and you will get all this resources, this information, including Clayton County's, like our school justice partnership model and our FAST panel I'm going to talk about in just a moment. And it talks about and then there's a section on alternatives to detention, okay? Community detention order. Bail. I mean, Georgia's a bailable state for kids. Now, I very seldom use bail. I don't have to. Our alternatives to detention are sufficient. And there's other reasons why. It's not the kid's property. I mean, kids don't have cash to put up, you know? And so how is that meaningful to the kid if it's not their money that they're going to lose, all right? Okay, now I'll tell you what I have done from time to time. And in fact, I spoke about it recently. I flew in from Denver last night at the National Council of Juvenile Family Court Judges. And there was a session on reforming bail, fees, and fines in the juvenile court system, okay? And Georgia being a bailable state, sometimes I'll have a kid that, you know, he's right there, whether detain or not detain, pending the trial or disposition, sentencing of a case, because he's had some past runaways, okay? And so I'll ask the mama, let's say it's the mama, and most of them are single parents, you know. Most of them are mama single parents. And I'll say, Mama, I said, what does your son like to do most of the time? Because I know it ain't studying right now, looking at his grades, okay? You know, and other than hanging out there with his antisocial friends, okay? Well, he likes the PlayStation or the Nintendo or the Xbox. And I'll say, well, I'll tell you what. I'll look at the probation officer and I'll say, probation officer, you go follow Mama and the kid on home. I'll release him. And you get that Nintendo. And you bring that Nintendo back, okay? Lock it up down there, secure it in the evidence, okay, son? And you got to see the kid, you know, when I say that. He's going, oh, not my Nintendo. I mean, we're talking about gangbangers. You know, these ones who portray themselves as really tough, right? Okay? The ones that like to get on Facebook and Instagram, you know, they're not too smart about this stuff. They're showing a gun, they're doing the signs, okay? They're crying in court because I'm taking their Nintendo away. God, if only their bad gangbanging friends could see them now. Bring it on back, son. You'll get it back if you show up in court. Okay? If you comply with the conditions here, and there's not too many of them here, because that's another thing I've learned. Don't put conditions on folks that they don't need to have those conditions. Don't set them up for failure. Okay? So we have a lot of things here. GPS monitoring, like kids who commit residential burglaries. I release them. I put them on a GPS. I love GPS because I know where they are all the time. I can sit on my bench, pull up a kid's name. I know where he is right then there. In fact, we actually had one kid who was absolved of a crime, who was accused of an armed robbery, and he had one of our GPSs on. He wasn't anywhere near where this happened at the time because it's all date stamped, all right? Okay. The FAST panel. This is something a lot of people like to replicate. In fact, in 2 weeks, Tippecanoe County, Indiana, is sending a delegation of 12 down to Clayton County because we get a lot of folks from around the country that visit us on a regular basis, usually once or twice a month, okay? Because we're a JDI EKC site, so we host so that they can come in and sit in on these things and ask questions and then go back and replicate it in their jurisdiction. The FAST panel is finding alternatives for safety and treatment, exploring causes and best pathway at the front door. As you can see here, looking at this photo, it's a multidisciplinary panel of experts. You have social services there, mental health. They meet every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday in the morning at 9 o'clock with the parents of the kids who were detained the day before. We have the school system there. You can see that there's somewhere. See the guy with the laptop there and he's punching some stuff in? He's with the school system. And he's looking up the kid's disciplinary record, grades, okay, attendance record. And by the way, if the kid has an IEP, he will have brought the IEP file to the meeting. The kid is going to have a hearing at 1:30, a preliminary hearing. All right? By the time we go in there, as a judge sitting on the bench, I'm going to turn to that guy at the head of the table named Shannon Howard. I say, Mr. Howard, I said, I assume that the FAST panel met and assessed and evaluated this young man and family. Yes, Your Honor, we did. Do you have a report to make? Yes, sir, Your Honor, I do. Go ahead, you may proceed. Well, Your Honor, this is what we found out. The mother was there, sometimes dad's there, or boyfriend, whatever significant other, stepdaddy. And this way, and so he gives a report: mental health, education, regular health, okay? Any prior CPS history about the parents, any mental health needs of the parents, you name it. Now, in the old days, before I instituted this on July 1st of 2003, I was on my own as a judge. It was up to me to figure all this stuff out. And I'm going to tell you something right now, okay? Hey, I'm not an expert in all those areas. And I don't pretend to be. I needed these people at the table at the front door. And that's why this is called the front-end loading approach. Get as much information as we can. Their goal is to try to get the kid out of jail that afternoon. That's their goal. Sometimes they can't. But a good many times they can, because I have the community all there. There's even private folks there from nonprofits providing services, MST, FFT, wraparound services. And we're getting these families, and you know what else is nice about this? Sometimes the FAST panel will say, Judge, we're asking you not to let this go any further into the juvenile justice system. We believe this needs to be handled on a mental health track. Okay? All right? Because that's what they need to be doing. And so they develop a plan for that, and it's managed, and someone's assigned to it. And that happens at the front door. Okay. So it creates a successful pathway. As a result, our average daily population has been reduced by 80% in our detention facility. Okay? Most of those kids of color. Okay? Kids of color. Because I inherited a system that was locking up black kids left and right for some of the most ridiculous things. Most ridiculous things. And we looked at our data. I asked our IT person to go back and take a look. I wanted to know what the white kids were getting arrested on. Okay? And I found out that many of these black kids were getting arrested on things for which white kids were not getting arrested on. And it wasn't because the white kids weren't committing the offense, by the way. Okay? So don't go there with me on that one. So, what the numbers show, public safety and detention alternatives. Our rearrest rates went down using safer alternatives to detention. GPS, the HITS program, MST, wraparound services. In other words, we were releasing more kids, but we had fewer reoffending going on, pending, coming back to court. Yet we were releasing a heck of a lot more kids. It just sounds so counterintuitive. But you see, again, the science, or some say the devil's in the details. Remember what I said earlier? It's not about just releasing the kids. It's about what you do with them when you release them. Okay? All right, let's not forget that. And that's where people misunderstand me, the ones who want to jump real quick with that knee-jerk reaction that I'm soft on crime merely because I'm releasing more kids. Well, why don't you ask me what I'm doing with them? Because I'm going to tell you, I have kids who don't want to go through the stuff I throw at them. They'd rather go to jail. They'd rather do the next 30 days in jail than have to go through all the stuff, especially the families, because now I've opened them up for inspection. And that scares a lot of families. When you put wraparound services in there, especially MST and FFT, and they start looking under all the nooks and crannies. Core strategy 2, create diversion programs for the youth who make us mad. Remember what I said earlier, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to increase the supervision, that is the effectiveness, and your supervision of the higher risk youth so you can reduce their reoffending. Because if you're going to save victims, it's not going to be with the low risk youth. The low risk youth aren't hurting other people. They're just pissing them off. They're what I call the POA kids, the piss off adult kids. Okay? All right? No, we want to set up a system so we don't have to spend more money, increase taxes to get more probation officers when it's not necessary. Ladies and gentlemen, our probation caseloads went from an average of 150 to 20. And we have not added a single probation officer position in all these years. Okay? So it's also, I like to say this, and Tracy Beaumont, who I want to shout out right here, okay? All right? Who he and I worked together on the Criminal Justice Reform Council here in Georgia. So he and I were both appointed by Governor Deal, okay? And in fact, didn't you chair the adult fines and fees and bail reform? He was, hey, you got to say that.
I was just a technical advisor because I was not a judge.
That is a court administrator's way of saying I was in charge.
How diplomatic was that? That's what makes him so great, okay? All right? But I just want to say it was a true joy and a pleasure to be with Tracy, to hear him speak, to hear him share and his input. You've taught me a lot, Tracy, okay? Thank you. But creating diversion programs for the youth who make us mad, okay? What did they look like, all right? First of all, ladies and gentlemen, I wrote an article about 3-4 years back about, I coined this term. You know, that's what you do when you want to get your name out there, okay? You just come up with these new terms, okay? And next thing you know, people begin to use them over and over again. And my job is to get this in the Webster Dictionary. But hyper-recidivism is the phrase, okay? Hyper-recidivism. And it's based on years and years of research. And that is, if we're not careful in identifying the kids who make us mad versus the kids who scare us, and we start treating the kids who make us mad as if they're the kids who scare us just because for the sake of looking tough, we do things tough, we turn them into the kids who scare us. That's a fact. We turn them into the kids who scare us. In fact, there's nothing worse than a system that takes kids who were going to age out of their delinquency and we turn them into lifetime criminals. That is pathetic. That is abusive, and that is stupidity, and we are adults, and we should not be getting paid to turn kids into criminals. That is wrong. That is criminal, as far as I'm concerned. And people who don't read the research and don't apply this research are bordering on criminality, in my opinion, in our careers. So, this is just one of many, many, many studies. If you use punishment alone, you will increase the risk of reoffending. Punishment alone will increase the risk. Punishment alone should only be applied for those fewer kids and adults who what? You just can't change them for whatever reason. I mean, they're the ones you got to lock up. Now, I've locked up my kids. I put my kids in YDCs. There have been some I've had to put in there for 5 years. because they scare the hell out of me. But they're far fewer, though. And that's the point I want to make. So yes, even the liberal-looking Judge Teske has put kids in prison for 5 years, which is the maximum I can give. And I will tell you with those kids, some of those kids I would have done more if I could. Because those were the few that were, well, they're just psycho. But we also know that bar that goes up, see that bar that goes above that line? That line, that right there is saying that when you start throwing treatment into it, you reduce the risk of reoffending. So the question is, what does the treatment look like? Okay? Because we're not talking about just any treatment. You just can't go out and say, I'm going to put Johnny in this program because it's treatment and say it's going to work, because not all treatment works. We want to talk about that before we close. All right? Because it's true with adults as well. For those, well, let me just ask it this way. How many of you have studied or read any article on the adolescent brain research? Right? We have some? We have some? Okay. All right. For those who did not raise their hands, in 1999, Dr. Geed, a medical researcher, used the innovative, at the time, innovative machine, the MRI, and did all these thousands of scans on teenagers. Okay? And what he found out is that the teenage brain isn't fully developed until age 25. Except for you women, it's age 23, but y'all already knew that. Okay? You women. And you know, some of us guys who are in a really good relationship with our wives, we know it too. We'll admit to it. Okay? All right? It keeps the marriage happy. All right? But with that said, the frontal lobe of the brain, ladies and gentlemen, look. See, when I put my finger right here, for those in the back, you can see it right there. That is your prefrontal lobe cortex, those of you who failed biology. Okay? Prefrontal lobe cortex. That part of the brain we've known translates emotion into logic. That's the part of the brain that helps us to resolve conflict. It is our problem-solving part of the brain. That's the part of the brain that is not developed in teenagers. Shocker, isn't it? No wonder we've coined the phrase teenage rebellion. Now, how many of you have teenagers in here? Or have had teenagers? Yeah. And how many of you, I won't ask this, but I'm sure many of you had some difficulties with your kid in your teenage years, especially when they thought they were right all the time. Okay? Well, their brains are still under neurological construction. And anything under construction, we need to be careful how we treat it. We need to be careful where we put those kids if their brain is still under construction. And if we can avoid putting them into an abusive detention center, when their brain is still under neurological construction, we need to do everything we can to make that happen, but yet, at the foremost, is keep the community safe. Ladies and gentlemen, we did a survey way back then on our early probationers, the ones who would talk to us about their gangbanging activities, okay? Do you know what we found in a number, and these were independent interviews of probationers who were on gangs, self-admitted, back in those days, because we detained so many kids on misdemeanor offenses that the gangbangers had it figured out that they would purposely commit a misdemeanor and get caught, mostly in a store, shoplifting, okay? So they could get into the RYDC to recruit other kids into gangs. That's right. That's right. And you know what we were doing as a system? We were accommodating them because we weren't being smart. We were being dumb because we weren't reading the research. So we had to shut that down. Now, how many of you, I asked how many have been to Savannah. If you've been to Savannah, have you been down to Tybee Island? Yeah, here's some yeses out there. That's Tybee Island. So my wife and I, we're out there, we're walking on the beach. We look over, and there's this kid. What a perfect shot. What a perfect shot. I mean, look at that. Keep off the jetties. There's another one, rocks. You know this is a progression for those over here. Look at this. It's like they stacked them, you know? Okay? It's like, well, this one didn't work. Let's go to this one. You know, there's probably mostly kids getting on the rocks, right? Because they're neurologically wired to do stupid things. And would you know, to my fortune, and you know why I took this picture, don't you? You know? I did it for you, Professor. It was a Kodak moment. Remember the Kodak moment? It was a great illustration of the adolescent brain. Why do you think, this is a 19-year-old kid, why do you think when he saw me snap the picture, he did this? He knew the sign was there because he's 19 years old. He hasn't reached age 25 yet. That's my stepson. Yeah. So after I used a couple four-letter words, unlike a juvenile court judge, which only we could do with our own children, okay, he proceeded to get down. But I'll tell you something about this young man, okay? He's going to be making a presentation next month in Birmingham, Alabama. He's now up in Montana, working for Blue Cross Blue Shield, making over $100,000. Graduated Georgia State University, degree in economics from the Andrew Young School of Public Policy, okay, just a year and a half ago, and he's making over $100,000. He just created an algorithm for the insurance company, insurance industry, and they have asked him to present that at a insurance conference, an international national insurance conference in Birmingham, Alabama next month. You see, ladies and gentlemen, you know, it's the teenage brain that in our lifetime is when we are the smartest. It is the most active creatively, intellectually. In other words, we're all going downhill right now is what I'm saying, okay? All right? Okay? But that's what I'm saying. There's a reason why, even though Mark Zuckerberg created Facebook by age 20 and Taylor Swift left home at age 14 to Nashville to start a music career, there were reasons why they still couldn't drink till age 21. It's because of this part of the brain that deals with figuring things out. The kids are prone to risk-taking behaviors, and that's why we have to be very, very careful. All right? But you know what? You take all of that, you know what we found out about the kids who find themselves in the juvenile justice system? And why we find parents in the child welfare system? Is because of trauma. Those adverse childhood experiences I mentioned earlier. You see, ladies and gentlemen, many kids commit delinquent acts and are disruptive because that's really their language. Okay? I mean, if you look at it right here, Judge Peggy Walker out of Douglas County, when children don't have language, their behavior becomes their language. Their disruptive behavior is their language. Their delinquent behavior is their language. You know what's happened with systems traditionally is that we look at their disruptive behavior and delinquent behavior instead of as a symptom. We punish it. You don't punish symptoms, right? You use symptoms to diagnose what's the cause of the symptom. But traditionally, in our systems, both adult and juvenile, historically, we haven't done that. The focus has been, over the years, punish, punish, punish. Now we're seeing a big trend away from that. Thank goodness. All right? I'll come back to Jane in just a moment. So, what we do as part of our diversion, here's some examples up there, is, you know, depending upon the category of the offense, whether it's theft, where it's a crime against a person, okay? So crime against property, crime against a person, a misdemeanor, you know, like the boundaries workshop you see up there, would be, let's say, the boy who inappropriately touches another girl, on the buttocks or whatever at school, all right? And let me show something to you. So some folks smarter than me came in that, does things like regression analysis. Folks like from Vanderbilt University, Mark Lipsey, came down and did a 2010 study. And one of the things they studied were all the kids that we diverted from the system that never saw the inside of a courtroom. Okay? That year there were 859 that never saw the inside of the courtroom. They tracked these kids for 3 years, and 70% we never saw again. We never saw again. Okay? And let me tell you what we did with many of these kids, by the way. Okay? Let's see, hold on. See, Charleston. And where are you from? North Carolina?
Yes, sir.
Oh, so you've heard about my school justice partnership model, haven't you?
I haven't. I've seen your presentation several times.
Oh, he's seen my presentation several times. You're the only one I'm going to let go to sleep right now. Okay? Hey, in fact, I need a break. Do you mind getting up and taking over from here? Okay. I love this. I love this guy. Okay. Yeah. So can you do me a favor? Since I picked on there was something about you. I just knew it. I was drawn to you to come over and use. And it turns out I've probably seen your face in the audience many times. Okay. Stand up for a moment if you don't mind. Okay. Now let's come over here so I don't trip and fall because you're probably going to hit me when I get done. Okay. No. Is it okay if I touch you?
It is.
Okay, wrong answer. You've heard this before. You've heard this before, okay? No, Charleston. Okay, look. All right. We'll start over, okay? Can I touch you?
As long as it's appropriate.
There you go. Here we go. Say it out loud again.
As long as it is appropriate.
Okay. Right, because what he has experienced in the past is when I ask someone that question, they answer, sure, because they trust the speaker. Come on, okay, all right, and then I do it, come on, really? No, the first question, you should be saying, is it a good touch or a bad touch? Okay, yeah, okay, it's a good touch, okay, put your hand out, okay, just one hand, there we go. Remember what I said, this is what we did with many of the kids. Now go and sin no more. No, go! Go, Charleston, okay? That's all we did. And you know what I get from that, from many folks? I have, literally. All you do, Judge Teske, is slap them on the wrist. That's right. That's all I did was slap them on the wrist because that's all they needed, for God's sakes. Hello. Read the research, you idiot. I mean, I don't tell them that. But I'm thinking that, okay? Because look, what if I had treated them harshly? What if I let them enter my system? What if I let them go through all the machinations of a justice system? What type of trauma, especially when many of those kids have suffered some form of trauma, that I'm not re-traumatizing them again? And I'm making them worse. That 70% is not going to be 70% in the future. Okay? Not coming back. It's going to be a smaller piece of the pie that doesn't return. Increasing supervision of high-risk offenders by increasing diversion of low-risk offenders. I mentioned that earlier. 83% decline in the number of probationers, all because, I'll put it this way. When I meet with my staff, I have 85 employees, and I meet with them every month. And every month I always tell them, all right, probation officers, stand up, look at your intake officers, and applaud them for the great work they did this month in helping to keep your caseloads down. That's right. That's right. It's about diverting the low-risk youth. All right. Core strategy 3. Create a school justice partnership to prevent school push-out. Okay? Remember what I said earlier in my opening? I am confident that one of the greatest reducers in recidivism among juveniles is how we treat them in school. Remember what I said about how go graduation rates, so go crime rates? So we have to figure out how to keep kids in school. But what's happened over the years, you've heard the phrase zero tolerance policies. You've seen in the media some of the most stupid things where we've arrested kids for throwing a wadded piece of paper across the classroom. All right? We've put handcuffs on them. All right? Or how about the young lady in Columbia, South Carolina, that thing that went viral of Deputy Fields dragging her out of a seat, taking her to the ground, and hauling her out of the classroom. You remember that, folks? You know, and I want you to understand something. The Department of Justice came in. And on matters outside the state of Georgia, I serve from time to time as a litigative expert for them on these school justice stuff. Because there's not too many people who, especially the one who created this particular model, it's nice to have that person giving them some suggestions, but particularly around training is really what I do. So they sent the Columbia, the Richland County SROs down here to Atlanta in this hotel. It was at this hotel, okay? And the new SRO that took over Deputy Fields' place was in that room. My superintendent was with me in doing the training, Lavinia Jackson, and she was asked the question by one of the SROs. How would you have handled this? Now keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, the context that we know that's not in dispute is that the teacher saw the young lady with the cell phone. She says, "Give me the cell phone." Instead, the young lady put the cell phone in her purse. She demanded the cell phone. The young lady refused. So the teacher gets the principal. The principal comes in. They go through the same thing. She refuses. Then the principal brings in the SRO. Now, up to that point, other than the fact in some states you could probably charge with a misdemeanor of disrupting public school, maybe, if that's even constitutional to be applied in that sense. All right? I ask you, had this girl up to that point committed a crime? No. Why are you calling a police officer into a classroom where no crime has been committed? So what is he going to do? He's going to behave as a police officer. And so he demanded that, which now became a command, a lawful, and whether it's a lawful command, that's a question, because was it his duty to be applying discipline to a student? And it got out of hand to the point that then she did resist arrest. Okay? But was it really a lawful arrest? Was there really probable cause? I mean, all this is debatable, but the fact that it's debatable suggests we probably never should have gotten there in the first place. You know what my superintendent said? Said, "You know what? You asked me what I would have done. Once she put up the cell phone, I would have smiled at her. And I would have said, 'Thank you, Susie, for putting up the phone. We'll talk about it later. Let's move on with class.' And Deputy Fields would still be employed today. And that video never would have happened. And the Department of Justice never would have had to fly down. And they never would have had to come to the Atlanta Hilton. All right? It's about bringing sense to how we treat kids. So, give you an idea. In Clayton County, when we put SROs in the schools, our arrests on campus went up 1,200%. Went from 49 the year before to about 1,400, okay, in 2003 and 4. And while this was happening, our graduation rates went down, fell to an all-time low of 58%. Because we were pushing kids out of school. And I know this because they've come in and already done the regression analysis, okay, on all this. I mean, school arrest as an independent variable, graduation rates as a dependent variable, okay? Crime rates as a dependent variable, graduation rates as an independent variable, on crime rates as a dependent variable. All of them at a 95% confidence level that there's a statistical relevance. If you look at the coefficients, you'll see to what extent you do this much will be reduced or this much will be increased. All right? So I developed this model back in 2003. In fact, North Carolina passed a law last year adopting this model. So the chief judge of the Judicial Circuit in North Carolina is going to receive a practice guide, which is going to include my toolkit on how to convene the stakeholders. So the chief judge in the Judicial Circuit, which you know you're going to be involved in it, okay, now has to convene all the stakeholders to develop an MOU to reduce school arrest, okay? And the toolkit includes how do you identify what type of delinquent acts in your locality do not need to be referred to the school system. There's another tool that helps the community to identify what are the alternatives in lieu of those arrests, okay? All right? In the practice guide, there's going to be a sample agreement as well. So you're not starting from scratch to make it as easy as possible. I've already seen the draft of it. It's getting ready to come on out, okay? It's really nice what your AOC has done in North Carolina, okay? I applaud them. So it's an MOU between schools, law enforcement, courts, create a school justice partnership using a Focus Act decision tree, which is one of the tools, by replacing arrest with a graduated response program, which is another tool, that is guided by a role conflict avoidance model, which is a decision tree to help guide localities in developing the terms of their agreement so that school resource officers, law enforcement, and administrators on school campus, okay, know when they can have contact with one another and where in between they should never meet, okay? Using the positive student engagement model for school policing, which is what we did in Clayton County is now adopted by the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and to eventually create an independent backbone agency to deliver services to the chronically disruptive kids. These are the kids who do not respond to the alternatives in lieu of arrest. Because you know why? They're the fewer kids, but it's because they're the ones who have clinical issues, and they need clinical services, all right, that restorative practices aren't going to deliver. To give you an idea, in the school year 2011-12, 420 kids were referred to an alternative to alternative to arrest. These are kids who committed a delinquent act, okay? Of those, 55 repeated that year. And of those 14, there were only 14 that repeated 3 times. That's all. Going back to my example with Charleston, you know, slapping on the wrist. But remember this, before the school justice partnership, all 420 kids were arrested. They were all handcuffed. They were all brought to juvenile court. And it begs the question, why were we doing that if we now know that only 55 repeated? And I wonder back then, now it makes sense why our graduation rates fell so low. We were making kids worse. We were hurting them, traumatizing them, is what the research shows. So today, our school arrests are now down 93%. Okay? And that's your raw data there. Kind of gives you an idea. Our graduation rates have gone up ever since. So to give you a clue, this is a combination of, you see, non-school filings, that is from the complaint, the arrest from the community. School filings are down, okay? All right. The black line is the graduation rates. Now, some of you are saying, well, what's that drop there? That's because the United States Department of Education said in 2011 that school systems across the country can no longer use overall reporting formula. In other words, if you start in the 9th grade, and it takes you 6-7 years to graduate, you can count the kid. But in 2012, no, we went to an adjusted 4-year cohort. If you start in the 9th grade, you can only count the kids who graduated 4 years later. So everyone's graduation rates fell across the country. But notice one thing about Clayton County. See the red line? So what you see overall is an 84% increase in graduation rates. Since then, under the new formula, a 20% increase in graduation rates for on time in the poorest county in all metro Atlanta. We are now graduating more African American kids who, by the way, we track them going on to either college or other type of career path, vocational or career path. In fact, I attended on May 8th a young man, a gangbanger, who's a benefit of the school justice program, okay, who ended up in our Second Chance Deep End program, all because we started changing the way we focus and looking at kids' assets, their strengths, as opposed to it being a deficit base. Found out this kid, all it took was a probation officer going to his bedroom and noticing all these airplane models that he had built when he was a kid and asking him, why'd you do all of this? He said, I've always been interested in planes. Are you still interested in planes? Well, guess what? On May 8th, at Middle Georgia State University, he graduated with his bachelor's degree in aviation science. He starts this fall at Georgia Tech in his master's in information technology, concentrating in cyber security, and he wants to be in air traffic control. I tell him you need to hurry up because the retirement age is much, all right? But this kid was smart. We saw him as smart. But it all started by just making the observation of the airplane models in his room. What's your interest, kid? What do you like? Because, maybe you can get it. Okay? All right. Kids of color. I got to come to an end here. Kids of color. Look at this. Kids back on our baseline year, black kids were 12 times more likely to be arrested on the same offense as a white kid on campus. Today, a black kid is just as likely to be arrested as a white kid for the same offense. Yet our African American population is 70% in our Clayton County school system. But a black kid is just as likely as a white kid to be arrested on campus on the same offense today. We call this disproportionate minority contact. And for us, those of you with juvenile jurisdiction, you know how important that is in order for the states to receive federal juvenile justice money. Number 4. And this is something I really want. This is across the board: adult jurisdiction, juvenile jurisdiction, even child welfare and juvenile jurisdiction. My father taught me this. He retired from CDC, right, here in Atlanta. He had immunization when he retired. His entire staff were epidemiologists. And so one day, he was asking me after a cookout in the backyard, the gazebo, and we were having a bourbon, because, it makes us think better, the bourbon. And he said, well, what are you doing these days, son? I was telling about School Justice Partnership, how the Annie Casey has given us a $50,000 travel budget. And by the way, it's now replicated in 40 states. Tomorrow, I leave here and go straight to the airport. I'm heading to Las Vegas. They signed their School Justice Partnership a couple weeks ago, and tomorrow, beginning at 7, I train every one of their principals in Clark County, Nevada, on the School Justice Partnership. So it's now in 40 states. But so I'm telling this, and Dad said, that's not much different than what we did in epidemiology, the study of diseases. Well, look at this, folks. That's the definition. To provide a basis for developing surveillance measures, prevention procedures for groups and at-risk populations, to identify, that's what we do in adult and juvenile. We identify the at-risk. Why are they at risk? And then once we identify that population, by getting to know that population, what's causing it, we're in a better place to develop treatment modalities, all right? But here's what my dad really taught me, okay? He said, son, if you look at the epidemiological basics, diseases don't occur by chance. And they're not randomly distributed, okay? He said, son, I'm not in your business, but that's really true of disruptive and delinquent behaviors. Okay? Delinquent behaviors don't occur by chance. Delinquent behaviors are not randomly distributed. There are reasons why they occur. Son, what you're trying to do is figure out those reasons so you can attack and address those reasons instead of punishing the symptoms. And over on the right, those are the causes of delinquent and adult criminal behavior. Family function, school connectedness, cognitive function, peers, substance abuse, poor problem-solving skills, adverse childhood experiences, I believe, will be added to it. It's not legitimately there yet, but it's going to get there, okay? And we know what's effective in program characteristics. We know what's ineffective in program characteristics. For example, self-esteem. Self-esteem isn't what gets it, okay? Because all you do when you put delinquent youth in a self-esteem program, you just simply build a more confident delinquent youth, okay? And self-esteem is not going to reduce recidivism. Technical violations of probation, we want to reduce them. Folks, I implore you to start looking at a case management system, and you know what? I challenge you to start considering how many technical violations you can remove, even down to 0. Okay? And you know what? Start developing a reward system, because positive responses outweigh negative in modifying behavior, okay? And that's how we were able to reduce our probationers. Our failure to appears are down. We no longer arrest kids on violation of probation unless they absconded. We don't do it. We walk them in. Why go arrest a kid if you just call them up, they're going to walk in with their parent? And you know what? I'm going to tell you what. The ones who we did issue bench warrants for when we got them in court, it was their parent who forgot. Not the kid, but we're locking up the kid. Now, how stupid is that? Okay. I got it in there. Q. Got a time? I promised I would, so I'm going to tell you, I promised them a Q&A, so you get one question. No, I'll let Patty figure that out, okay? Because they just want to get out of here.
Oh, I get it. No, I got it. Judge.
Yes. It's being uploaded on, yes. Will says it's uploaded. And there's a whole lot on here, but I want to make sure at least, that you, especially on research and studies and where it's documented, that you have something in writing. That's the greatest thing about the PowerPoint slides, really. Yeah.
Once, twice, going. All right, if we could thank Judge Teske for his presentation.
Thank you.